on the lesson. This session will discuss the legal and ethical issues in nursing leadership and management. Before I start reviewing the legal and ethical issues in nursing management, let me go over the objectives of this session. By the end of the session, you should be able to identify the sources and types of laws and regulations and distinguish their impact on nursing practice. Analyze ethical theories, virtues, principles, and values as the basis for professional nursing practice. Analyze the nurse's role as a patient advocate and the duty to follow another practitioner's orders, and evaluate ethical issues encountered in practice, including cost containment, use of technology, and the patient's rights. Assignment, delegation, and supervision. What this means is that just as we are thoughtful in determining what patients need and what our priorities for care are, we must be thoughtful when we create assignments for others. For example, are we creating assignments that we know someone could not accomplish or that are beyond a person's knowledge and skills? We must also be thoughtful in delegating tasks to others. For example, we must be clear that the delegate knows when to seek help and what to report, and we must be thoughtful in providing supervision to others. For example, asking, "How are things going?" is insufficient, except in the rarest of cases where two people have worked together and know that honesty and proactivity are inherent in the person being supervised. So, to avoid concerns of malpractice, we must be cognizant of our best communication skills and observation skills to assess and judge how others are accomplishing their work. Assignment. Don't confuse the typical assignments that are made at the beginning of shift with this item. This term refers to the legal context when another person assumes both legal aspects of care, accountability, and responsibility. Thus, it refers typically to the relationship between two professional people. It is clear that the person making assignments must know the team members as individuals to make accurate assignments. The individual also has an accountability when given an assignment that is beyond the individual's ability to execute. It also must involve speaking up and defining what issues exist in completing the assignment. Delegation is a complex process that basically keeps the delegator, the registered nurse, accountable for the tasks that another, we'll call them the delegate, performs. The other person, the delegate, then has been authorized to perform a designated task or set of tasks and assume the responsibility for performing that task in the best manner possible. Again, the delegator, registered nurse, must know the abilities of the delegate, and the delegate must be able to define any limitations to performing the tasks assigned. Supervision entails observation and communication. It requires creating judgments and providing feedback. For the judgments to be correct, a dialogue about the care being rendered and systems issues that are complicating that care delivery must occur. Doctrine of a respondent superior means that the manager or immediate supervising person made assignments or delegations appropriately and had no reason to believe that the person accepting the assignment or the delegation was unable to perform adequately. The liability is minimal or almost non-existent. The opposite is also true. So again, thinking cautiously and assigning and delegating and knowing how others are prepared and typically perform are important. What you see in this slide is related to the elements of accountability. Now think about each of those elements to determine if you are aware how to know each element, the colleague accountability and the nurse manager accountability. There is a duty to orient, educate, and evaluate. This duty goes beyond that of the continuing education department. Nurse managers must ensure that those whom they supervise continually provide safe and competent nursing care. To be practical, here are some questions you can ask yourself about another individual in your team. Is this staff person new? Has he or she completed orientation to the organization, to the unit, to the shift? Has this person participated in orientations to new equipment and procedures? Has this person been adequately supervised? Do I concur with the evaluation about performances? The failure worm concept is an avoidance of liability. It pertains chiefly to administrative persons, but there are many states that require, through their peer review processes, that individuals suspected of addiction, violent behavior, and incompetency be reported by professional colleagues. For example, if a registered nurse witnessed violent behavior on the part of another registered nurse, many states require that the first registered nurse report the incident to the State Board of Nursing. Managers, through their actions, are preventing others from hiring an individual suspected of harmful behavior without knowing that such conditions existed in the current employment situation. Most states recognize qualified privilege so that current employers can share factual, objective information with prospective employers without violating confidentiality. This is true only when the person seeking a new position has cited the prior employing organization or manager in the application process. Probably no other area is as controversial as the area of staffing. Part of this is due to the fluctuation in patient census, and part is due to the shortage of qualified staff. Matching numbers and qualities of staff with the needs of the patients is always a challenge. There are three key areas to consider: maintaining adequate numbers of staff, floating staff from unit to unit, and using temporary staff to augment the current staff members. We are now going to discuss each of these separately. Most staffing levels are not specified in terms of numbers. Thus, challenge about staffing is that understaffing is always determined in court on an individual case basis. The mandate from groups such as the Joint Commission and others is that adequate staffing is maintained. The challenge is that there is great discussion around the term adequate. The adequacy is based on patient acuity, but there is considerable debate about the accuracy and flexibility of the systems that exist to measure acuity. Actual numbers of people is one consideration. The next is the mix of staff. Are there sufficient registered nurses to provide the required standard of care? Is the ratio of RNs to LVNs appropriate? And what about nursing assistants? Most literature since 2001 has supported the idea that the number of registered nurses available to patients makes a difference, and a few have indicated that additional educational levels for staff correlate with better patient outcomes. Being proactive as a patient side nurse or as a charge nurse or manager is important. If staffing is insufficient, the concern needs to be expressed to the next level of management so that the immediate need is known, and also so that the longer range implications of budgeted positions, for example, are known. When staffing levels are insufficient or not sufficient, everyone should be concerned. Anyone can document the staffing levels and what the issues are about the levels. Using the chain of command, the next step is to report the concern to the next level of management. This may be the charge nurse, who might be able to alter the situation, but he or she often consults with the manager or supervisor to have overtime authorized, and then to find someone able to return the care setting. Reassigning people almost always involves the supervisor unless the manager has accountability for more than one unit and the staff are prepared to cover both units. Restricting admissions is a challenge because there may be no other place for the patient to go. So there may be a period of challenge before this action is helpful. After all, the patients that are creating the current demand are truly there. It is important to follow the chain of command to the necessary levels so that the others beyond nursing know the challenges of the staffing levels. Floating is also known as pulling staff from one unit to another. When floating staff from one unit to another, it is safest when a cross-training program exists so that the person being moved from Unit A to Unit B is also familiar with the care standards of Unit B. Sometimes this requires moving multiple people to capitalize on the staff's abilities and the patient's needs. Thus, to fill a need on Unit B, the nurse from Unit A may have gone to Unit C, from which a nurse went to Unit D, so that the nurse on Unit D could go to Unit B. You can see how complex the concept of floating becomes. Nurses should be floated to units as similar to their own unit as possible. This requires the nurse manager to match the nurse's home unit and float unit as much as possible, or to consider negotiating with another nurse manager to cross-float a nurse. Open communications regarding staff limitations and concerns, as well as creative solutions for staffing, can alleviate some of the potential liability involved and create better morale among the floating nurses. A positive option is to cross-train nurses within the institution so that nurses are familiar with 2 or 3 areas and can competently float to areas in which they have been cross-trained. Apparent agency comes into play because courts have now viewed that the temporary employee has, in a sense, held himself or herself out to be acting in behalf of the organization. Thus, a patient wouldn't know necessarily that Nurse A was a hospital employee and Nurse D was an agency employee. The patient sees 2 nurses available to provide care. While an agency nurse may be very clear about who the employer is, this may be difficult for patients to grasp due to many factors, including the stress of hospitalization. Hospitals do not relinquish liability because the hospital is accountable for the patients who have sought care there. The hospital, through its regular employees, controls which patients are assigned to the agency staff and evaluates the performance of this agency staff. The same expectations and questions asked about new employees applies here. Whether the temporary worker is a nurse or an assistant, it is important to perform the same supervision as with regular employees who are new to a unit. The inability to perform must be reported to the nurse manager, who should report such to the agency. The manager should also know to refuse to accept this individual's services in the future unless sufficient documentation supports a change in performance levels. Staffing a unit or even a shift is a challenge. It is a complex process of matching numbers of staff with needed abilities to the needs of the patients at the time. It requires substantive judgment, and this skill is expected of registered nurses.